Today, we're going to be comparing two lenses at the same focal length. We have the Lumix 25mm and the Rokinon 24mm. Just right off the bat, we can see that they're two very different sizes and two very different lenses at two completely different price points. So why is this important? It is important to know the difference between these two lenses, whether you need to go the $150 route with this lens or the $600 route with this lens. They're two very different lenses that have two very different looks. And right off the bat, you might be thinking, well, they're the same focal length, why does it matter? So I'm out here doing some testing on some vintage glass, and I took my 1973 Triumph Spitfire out for a drive, and I figured, let's shoot some stuff on both lenses, and let's see if you guys can actually tell the difference between the two lenses when they're not side by side, but in like a B-roll sequence cut together. So let me know what you think down in the comments. Different lenses have different character qualities. It's important to know which lens is better. They each have their own specific use and their own different look. Each lens looks different. They have tiny characteristics that are slightly different from the other, and it's important to know the difference so you know which one to buy. Because there are two different price points, that might influence your decision too. It's important to understand why which lens is the right pick for you. Each lens has different character qualities, like chromatic aberrations, black levels, and all sorts of things that we're going to be discussing in this video about why one lens is better than the other, why pricier lenses are often better than cheaper lenses. So I did some initial testing with both lenses just to compare the bokeh and other characteristics. We're shooting both lenses at f2 or t2, which there's a huge difference between the two. Basically, in layman's terms, it is measurement of light versus theoretical versions of light. One of the major things I noticed was the bokeh. As you can see on the Rokinon lens, the bokeh is slightly more hexagonal. It's not quite circular, right? It's a bit more blocky. You can see those sharp edges, whereas on the 25mm, it's way more circular and much cleaner. And this could be because we're shooting both at f2 and t2, right? The 25mm is much closer to its open aperture at f1.8, whereas we're shooting a little bit further from that most open aperture on the Rokinon, which is a T1.5. So that can be causing some differences there, but it's important to note the differences in that bokeh, that you can see the bokeh, even on the out of focus parts, looks to be a little bit more hexagonal, and especially in the lights, in the fairy lights, that the bokeh on the Lumix is way more circular and cleaner. Now let's look at the chromatic aberrations. Chromatic aberrations are those little pink and green lines you can see around the edges of your out of focus parts. It's way clearer here on the Rokinon lens, right? You can see the green and you can see the pink much more clearly, whereas on the Lumix, you don't see it as much. Let's talk about black levels. You can see that the Rokinon lens has a much cleaner fade over the whole image, raising those black levels a little bit higher, bringing in a little bit more information in the shadows. Whereas on the Lumix lens, it's really crushing the blacks. There's not this wash of color over the whole thing. Both of these lenses were tested at the same aperture, as well as the same camera and the same settings. So that's not changing. It truly is the lens that's adjusting your color. I personally prefer the look of the Rokinon in this case, simply for the fact that that wash over the whole image or that fade looks a lot better. Not to mention that there's more detail in the shadows for you to work with. Hold on, my cat is being a psychopath. You're being a psychopath. She's being crazy. Stop. Let me love you, please. Now, one of the biggest differences between these two lenses is autofocus versus manual focus. On the Rokinon lens, you only have manual focus capabilities. Now, this has its benefits for a lot of reasons. On the Rokinon lens, you have focus teeth, right? You have teeth on the focus and aperture ring, allowing you to use a focus wheel in order to focus pull. Please stop yelling. She's looking at the camera. She's trying to attack the dead cat. She feels threatened. Another benefit about the focus on both lenses is that this has a much faster focus pull or focus throw. You can go from your minimum to your maximum focal distance way quicker. On the Lumix lens, it took me forever to try to rack focus down the keyboard, right? I had to spin, adjust, spin, adjust, spin, adjust. Whereas on the Rokinon lens, I was able to get a much cleaner, smoother pull throughout the whole image. and that's because you have something called a manual focus versus an electronic focus. The Rokinon is fully mechanical, especially even in the aperture. You have a D-clicked aperture, so you're able to adjust the aperture cleanly like this, again with a set of gears. So that could be a huge difference, is that autofocus versus manual focus. The Rokinon obviously doesn't have autofocus, so if you're doing something like vlogging or an interview like this where there's nobody behind the camera, but the autofocus is good on the Lumix lens. Hence why I bought it. I needed something at 24mm for the Blackmagic in case I wanted to run it on something like a gimbal where I didn't have to pull focus. I think one of the biggest reasons to buy the Lumix lens or a cheaper lens is simply because of that. It's cheaper. It is a cheaper lens. This lens was $150 at f1.8. It's great for portraits if you have a micro four thirds, but this really isn't about this specific lens. It's about lens choice in general. Sometimes your cheaper lens is sharper. In this case, mine is. This Rokinon lens is always going to be my first choice when filming a short film because of the filmic cinematic look that it gives, as opposed to the sharper, clean look that the 25mm Lumix lens has. If I needed a clean, sharp look like I would for product photography or videography, then the Lumix would always be my first choice at that millimeter because of its sharpness. Overall, the Rokinon just seems to be more upgradable. Over time, you can put this on more mounts, you can put this on a focus wheel, you can put this with rails. This is more upgradable at a cheaper price point than, let's say, your fully fledged cinema lenses. Lens choice matters. While price may definitely play a factor in your decision, it's important to note each difference and quality of each lens. The differences aren't incredibly apparent to the normal person's eye. For us filmmakers, it's clear to see which lens is better or qualities between the two lenses, but it's important to note them and take them down so that you know which lens to choose for the project. Like I stated before, the Rokinon is great for something like your interviews or your short films, something where you can be a little bit more artistic and creative because it does have a different aesthetic quality. But for a product demo or product shots, the Lumix is definitely the way to go. You're getting a clean, sharp image that's pretty fast at an f1.8. I hope this video helped you pick out which lenses are better and why you don't always need to splurge on super nice glass, but can settle with something cheaper to get started. I also hope this video helped you learn the differences between two different lenses from two different brands, and that price doesn't always play the only factor in choosing the lens, but there is an aesthetic quality between the two. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you so much.